Hello, I'm talking tonight to the very distinguished photographer Keron Psillas. And Keron, I'd like to ask you about your project that you're working on part 2, I think, Loss and Beauty.
Yes.
Can you tell me how it all began?
I'd be very happy to. Beginning in 2010, I made my first journey into Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, what was Germany behind the Iron Curtain, and then on to the Czech Republic. I've been a student of history all of my life, and as I passed a sign on the highway that said Bergen-Belsen, I said to a dear friend who was accompanying me on this voyage, well, I'd really like to stop there. I'm aware of the history and I'd like to make a visit. Would that be all right? And he immediately complied. And then I spent all afternoon trying to make a photograph that had something to say, and I failed miserably. And I thought about it then for the next couple of days as we were making our way further into Eastern Germany and then ultimately into the Czech Republic. I thought about my inability to make a photograph that had anything to say, that had any authenticity about it. And I thought also about whether it was appropriate that I even try to make a photograph about a subject with such importance to so many millions of people around the world, people who had such a personal experience of. And that thought stayed with me. I arrived in a town called Psillas in Germany, and as I was walking through the streets, I literally stumbled over a marker in the sidewalk that made note of a victim of the Holocaust who was taken from their home, right where the marker was on the sidewalk on the main street of this village. And it had the date of their birth, their name, where they were taken to, in this instance to Theresienstadt, and ultimately where they were murdered. And again, in this instance, it was Auschwitz. And I learned then that that project was created by a German artist named Gunther Demnig, and they're called Stolperstein, which translates roughly to stumbling block. And the idea is that citizens, tourists, people going about their everyday lives in towns all over Europe now will stumble across these blocks and be reminded of the tragedy that took place. Then I understood that an art project could be made with sensitivity and have something authentic to say. So I took that thought on into the Czech Republic and visited the Jewish quarter in Prague, as many hundreds of thousands of people do each year. Was moved by the old Jewish cemetery with the thousands upon thousands of graves, and then the Spanish synagogue with its glorious renovation. And then we traveled to Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was unique in the history of the camps because it was used as a model camp. It was used to fool the Red Cross. It was used to say, oh, look, these camps aren't so bad. It's a relocation camp, and the Jews have cafes that they can attend and concerts, and look, there's a sporting event happening, all of which was a ruse. As I said, Theresienstadt is unique. People were moved into what were military barracks, and they awaited transport generally from Theresienstadt to somewhere else. Later in the war, people did understand that their family members, their loved ones, were going to Auschwitz, and in many instances understood that that meant nearly certain death. The burden of transport was a psychological burden that many could not bear, and it caused such suffering on top of suffering. But while I was in Theresienstadt, I could see traces, because there are things left. There are rooms, there's a prayer room, there are dormitory rooms, there are artifacts, and that touched me deeply. I still wasn't able to make a photograph that had anything to say. I went back home to the United States, and I spent a year reading, immersing myself in biography and autobiography of victims of the Holocaust and survivors as well. Eventually, I came across a book titled The Girls of Room 28 by Hannelore Brenner. And this book tells the story of 14 young girls between the ages of 12 and 14 who survived and whose memories of their time in Theresienstadt are tempered, and even their strongest memories were memories of happiness and joy of being with their friends, almost always centered around a creative act. And what I mean is that while they were writing or making poetry or attending a performance of a musical program or a play or acting in a play, their memories sustained them. That act sustained them. And that had a great impact on me. The subtitle of the book, Loss and Beauty, is Creating Solace in a Land of Infinite Sorrow. And I thought, having read the book, that those girls were engaged in creating solace, but creating hope as well. And they made a pact that they would get together every year thereafter, the ones that survived. And they have. They've relived their time, certainly of sadness and great tragedy and horror, but also of laughter and joy. Again, around poetry and music and singing and dancing, and those times when they could be children still, but also to be creative. And I took that as an inspiration to say, I can honor their suffering, I can honor the victims, and still create something of beauty. I was seeing things that were beautiful, and I didn't know how to square that. As a photographer, I was seeing light streaming through a window, coming through a chemise, as if it had been left just as it was 70 years before. The simple act of hanging laundry on a line and having the light come through it, and we as photographers understand that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the poetry in that moment. And I was seeing little signs of this here and there, and I thought, I can't make pictures like this. And yet I was driven to.
So bit by bit, you were beginning to formulate almost a narrative, a photographic narrative, that you would embrace in the form of a book that could tell the story that you were bursting to tell, effectively, because you felt you couldn't not do anything. And presumably, I think you must have felt that the world didn't really know the sort of detail that you had discovered. Was that it, really? Or
yes, early on, I just wanted to make pictures so that I could understand. And now I've come to realize that I'll never understand. I'll never be able to understand how this could have happened. But I can add to the conversation that must be had, the conversation about what we destroy when we hate. But I want to do it in my little way. And my little way turned out to be through making photographs. And then after 2 journeys back, I had the idea to composite the images so that one overlaid on another told a story historically, aesthetically, psychologically, and had a fuller representation of what I was feeling when I was standing there and making the image.
And that was Loss and Beauty.
That became Loss and Beauty then, yes.
But now you're returning soon.
Yes.
And you're going back because you're not done.
I'm not done.
There's more to say.
Yes, sadly there is. Part 2 of Loss and Beauty will be, in many ways, I think, a more difficult task to make the photographs for. I want to try to tell a bit of the story of what happened before the industrial killing machine was put in place, before there was an Auschwitz, before there was a Treblinka or Sobibor. And so what was before? What came before were the 4 groups of the Einsatzgruppen who came behind the Wehrmacht and murdered people one by one at the end of a rifle in small villages and large, in small towns and large, to destroy the fabric of society in Poland and further into Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, and this area, particularly after the pact with the Soviet Union broke down. And the Einsatzgruppen went into villages and large and small, towns large and small, and would take out the doctors, the lawyers, the professors, the music teachers, the pillars of society, and in so doing, terrorize society and destroy the fabric, if you will. And later then the actions came for coming to take victims to go to work camps and then murdering children under 12, those deemed unfit for work, under 12 or over 50, whoever wasn't able to contribute to the war machine that was Nazi Germany.
And the photographs that you're going to make, you probably don't know at this stage and can't know the nature of those photographs, because you'll approach this earlier stage of your explorations in a way that's, I suppose, going to be quite challenging, isn't it? If you think about it, and I'm sure that it's an extremely harrowing procedure for you to sort of immerse yourself into, both artistically and intellectually. You must come out feeling pretty wretched on this.
I do.
These trips.
And each time I go, it becomes harder to leave, to go, because I know what I'm going into, as it were. But it never leaves me. I'm never not thinking about it on some level. And I'm always reading. I'm always trying to inform myself in a much deeper way. And so I kind of, there's a part of me that always stays there, working on the project. You know, it might be back here in my brain somewhere, but it's always there.
Your style of photography in Loss and Beauty, which I've looked at a lot, and of course you've supplied all the narrative, all the text and everything.
Yes.
It's entirely your work.
Yes.
What's rather interesting to me is it likely that you will use this same very effective style of making your images for this earlier period, because then the two would sort of come together and it would make a very good, what would you call it, a prequel, if you like, before the sequel?
I will be using the same style, and I can say that with some conviction because I've had I don't know whether to call it a vision or a dream or what have you, but I've awoken with a fully formed image in my mind, and it is a composite. And I know those images are out there, and I know where to find them, and I'm going to go and get them. But they are an image laid onto another. And it'll be a little more difficult to find them for this part of Loss and Beauty, because in the original Loss and Beauty, we have the structure still of the camp at Auschwitz. We have the structure of the camp in Birkenau. We have the structure of some of the shtetls that I visited with my tremendous guide and helper, Dr. Tomasz Cebulski. Those things exist. You know, the furniture in the rooms, silent though they are, the furniture in the rooms in Theresienstadt became one part of an image, and another room in Auschwitz became the other part of it. I think that there will be less of this in the areas that I'm traveling to next, but there will be some structure and architecture to help inform those things, but that I'm not worried about.
No, I'm sure not, because, and also you've developed a lot of, unbeknownst to you, you've probably got a reservoir of images in your mind from Loss and Beauty, and it's a continuation.
Yes.
But what's quite interesting to me is that style was very, very effective.
Oh, thank you.
It really, really was, because in a way it was mixing yesterday with today, and it was absolutely fascinating, and it's proved to be I think really very, very successful. Because when we first started this conversation, you were putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that you didn't know how to express your response to this particularly hideous period. Yes. And now you've managed to somehow encapsulate it, and you produce Loss and Beauty. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful project to be engaged with. I must say what surprised me was when you were talking to me about it just a moment ago, that the huge majority of people are only familiar with, how can we put it, the sort of the set piece, the camps.
Yes.
And know very little certainly about the post, how they were liberated in a way, but not much at all about the 2 or 3 years that preceded those.
It's true. Well, we all lead busy lives. We all have hopefully full lives that occupy us and keep us engaged. And history has always been an important subject for me since I was a very little girl. And so it's easier for me to latch on to those things. And people tease me about knowing dates and times and things that, you know, why do you keep those things in your brain? Well, they're meaningful for me. I hope that the visual effect of loss and beauty will encourage others to become engaged, certainly in the conversation that we need to have today, again, about what we destroy when we hate and how it's utterly meaningless. That we...
I can hear a million voices, a billion voices agreeing with you.
Yes.
Keron, Psillas, thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Charlie.
sharing this extraordinary project with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.